fantastic evening, and fair play to everybody who's contributed, and fair play to all the panelists and Deirdre and all. Thanks for coming. It's good to finally see. It's great to finally see a female participant on one of these panels, and you've been a breath of fresh air. Just before the panel finishes up, if you could talk directly to a young nationalist, teenager, working class person, maybe from Strabane or Craigan or the markets or Ardoyne, who's facing socio-economic deprivation, a prescription drug epidemic never before seen, who sees hopelessness in the future and no other way out, maybe as thinking about engaging in this new phase of Ireland's struggle that seems to be kicking off, or is thinking about joining one of these groups and trying to fight physically imperialism in Ireland, or trying to like continue on a war, the end partition, whatever. If you could speak directly to that young teenager now this evening, and shortly and brief, what would you say?
Well, you'd be sitting down and saying then you need to get involved in politics. You need to be involved in their local community, first and foremost. Get educated about your history. Look at the options. Become involved in left-wing socialist politics. And there's nothing wrong with becoming a Republican. And get the hidden element away from Republicans hiding behind doors. Let's get out front and be proud of it and stand up straight and say, I'm a Republican. I want my community to be better off. I want my society to be better off. Therefore, I'm going to strive forward to try and achieve that in some way.
Basically asking the question about the use of armed force, and I think that's a very important question to ask. I think the question I would ask is, what do you want to achieve? What do you hope to achieve? And I would refer to an old observation made by a man that knew a lot about the use of force, Napoleon, and he said that you can do a lot of things with a bayonet, but you can't sit on it. And the thing about it is, the bottom line is, what do you hope to achieve? Can you achieve what you want to achieve with it? And if you can't, then what's the consequences of failure to use it? Don't be afraid to use it if it's necessary, because that's the one thing we can't avoid in this society. As I said through the talk, if it hadn't been for armed resistance, we'd still be afraid of the programmes. But there comes a stage when it becomes counterproductive rather than productive. What do you hope to achieve? And if you can't, then search for another option. And we have many options, because we've got to build the support for what we want to do. And that's step one, is without it you're not going to do anything with a gun. You can't sit on a bayonet.
Well, I would say the young fellas, or young women, again, I wouldn't preach to them. I certainly wouldn't go down the road of condemning. I think that societies in which we condemn and point fingers at Republicans who utilise armed actions, I wouldn't want to be part of that. But what I would say is, for what it's worth, even when the war was at its height, what both the main armies in the field were demanding, as far as I can remember, it was a mere declaration of intent to withdraw. Nobody was asking for them to jump on the boats in the morning. I'm not saying that the shifts that we spoke about tonight are comparable to a declaration of intent to withdraw, but it may be comparable it may be comparable to that, in that it may represent a future in which we're going to have Irish unity. Just think again, I would never preach to them, I haven't got the right to preach to them, but I would ask them to seriously consider this. In regards to you also mentioned alcohol, drugs, and youth violence. Simple, take hope in society, take hope in the future, take your anger out on the streets with us, with the Irish Unity, with Patterdale Society, Communist Party, 16 societies, whoever. Take your anger out on the streets and demand Irish unity.
Yeah, and I think it's another really good question, and it's things that we should be doing in terms of engaging particularly young people. And if it was me, in terms of starting, it would be asking them firstly, what are their fears, what are their concerns, what drives them, how do they think of their community, because their initial thing is the community around them, maybe the school they go to, are there any youth provision, and again it's getting into a conversation with them, and it's saying, well, if you do feel that you have dissent or that you have concerns, then how do you feel? So it would be a two-way conversation that I would be having. One thing I never do is preach, and particularly to young people, or to say this is what I think you should be doing. They need to educate and inform themselves and then come up with their own opinions. I can give my view of the world, but it's up to them. So I would have that two-way conversation with them, and trying to draw out what are their fears and concerns, because there are big fears. I mean, the fella touched on it earlier in terms of mental health, but that didn't start from the Good Friday Agreement, or I mean, that's always been here. You know, so just removing Stormont or even the agreement, those issues are still going to exist. So what do we do? But how do we engage young people? And I do think education is critical, education outside of school, and it can't just be left as well. I mean, I'm a Sinn Féin councillor. It's not just down to me as a Sinn Féin councillor. There's people in this room involved in the GAA, the Irish language, maybe the women's movement, the trade union movement. How are we having this conversation about the type of society that we want to live in? How are we informing them? And I mean, again, I'm going back to it because it's where I live and what I'm familiar with. This campaign, when we done the education or the programmes, and Tommy was part of a programme looking at labour and Irish history, he was one of the speakers. The amount of young people that got involved and went to those programmes, and at the start they were nervous because there's a confidence issue as well, maybe with some young people, and they act out because there's maybe a confidence issue too. So it's really getting to understand what that young person is, getting them comfortable to come into some type of programme or information, and that could just be a wee discussion around a room with a cup of tea or a tin of juice or whatever. And then it's starting to take them along, and I mean, we found that that really worked in the market, where whether it was protesting out on the street, whether it was going to court, whether it was going door to door to get petitions, and soon enough they turn into activists. And again, I say not everybody needs to be, I mean, I was a community activist before I was a political activist, in a sense where you could argue that it's all one and the same, you know, and their activism could just be local, but that local activism contributes to everything else that we're trying to do, because when you read that programme, how do you get that down into the grassroots? But engagement is key, and I think it's a critical question, because you know, there's demographic change, not just in terms of Catholic or Protestant or other, but there's a youth divide, you know, there's a generational shift now that we need to tap in and we need to be aware of. And the only way is to talk and engage young people, not to talk down to them. And I think that's critical, and it's where they're informing themselves, and that has to be a variety of views. Can't just be one person or one perspective. They have to be educated in a variety, and then they come up with what their own beliefs are.